questions our kids are asking. Hey, not like we did last week, I'm just going to start with a couple of questions that came out of the box. And also, let me do my little disclaimer. Thank you. My little disclaimer is some of these questions, I can only scratch the surface. And if you've asked them, you probably want a much deeper answer. And the good news is there's some really, really great people in this room right now. And if you have got good questions, we know that most questions don't deserve a statement, they deserve a conversation. And so, hey, if we feel like we've scratched something and you want more, can I suggest you ask someone? And if you don't know who to ask, just ask someone and they'll point you to someone. And whoever they point you to, I'd say there's a pretty good chance they'll either be able to answer it or they'll be able to point you to the right person who can. So it's not going to get bumped around, I promise, because I just know there's some great people in here, and they'll do a fantastic job of answering your questions. And we just know that questions do deserve that conversation, not just to be cast aside. We got a whole lot last week, so we're just trying to figure out where we can go for some of them to get more answers out. But I'll do a couple today before we tackle our main one. Here's the first one. It said, tolerance is now about recognizing and valuing all views. How can we be tolerant of people/leaders who influence cultures to destroy other cultures? People are suffering who may be followers of their God. I despair. How can I be tolerant of this? I think last week we talked a little bit about the changing nature of tolerance and how traditionally tolerance has been, hey, I will stand for you to have a voice even if I don't agree with what you're saying. And I think one of the best things we can do is really push for that level of tolerance at all times. What we've got to understand is that tolerance isn't accepting. Tolerance isn't advocating for. Tolerance isn't me then agreeing with the views that you might have. We can have different views. But tolerance says, hey, your view is just as important as my view because you're a person just like me. We might disagree. We might be on very different sides of this. My tolerance doesn't mean I have to change and endorse or promote your view, but tolerance says, hey, I've got to be willing to listen to it. And then if we want to have a conversation, we do it with civility, we do it with kindness, we do it with care. And then if someone's got a crazy view, which we see around the world from time to time, right? You can ask genuine questions. And then the best part about it is the more crazy someone's view is, the least questions you need to ask for them to start to maybe realize where their views are. So I just encourage you that we've got to be tolerant. Just because you're tolerant of something doesn't mean you're endorsing it, doesn't mean you're promoting it, doesn't mean you agree with it. But I think we want to make sure that everyone's got a voice because their voice matters just as much as ours. Second question said this: if Jesus loves everyone, why are so many people homeless? Why does bullying exist? Why do guns and drugs exist? Why do people murder? And so there's a lot of questions there. I'm just going to sum it up a little bit and say, I think what this question's asking behind the heart of it really is if God loves everyone, why is there so much bad stuff going on in our world? And the scratch the surface answer here is sin. That what I love about Christianity, one of the reasons that I feel that you can stand so strong in Christianity and I'm compelled by it and drawn towards it is because no matter what religion you might adhere to, no matter what you think about life, is a big question that comes up that you kind of have to answer is origin. Where did humanity come from? Where did Earth come from? And I think that the Christian explanation of origin is the most compelling that's out there. Well, what we're told when it comes to origin is that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, that everything was intentionally created. And so not only does it help us understand origin, but it helps us understand this thing called sin that has an impact on all of us. And the truth is, when sin came into the world, it impacted everything. It impacted our relationship with God. It impacted our relationship with ourselves. It impacted our relationship with others. And it impacted our relationship with creation. And the reason that there's bad things that happen in the world is because of sin, and then just the reality that God gave us free will. He let us choose. And because sin is in the human heart, that we all have a tendency to sometimes think bad things, to desire bad things, to want bad things, that sometimes we act out on those. And so there's a lot of bad that's in the world. And the reality is, if God was to wipe out all the bad things in the world, guess what? You and I'd be wiped out too, because sin isn't something that happens out there, it's something that happens in here. So if Jesus loved everybody, why are people homeless? Scratch surface answer is sin. If you this is a really deep theological question. If you really do want to talk that through, just like I said, ask someone, and someone really smart will sit down and talk it through with you, and I'm sure you'll get better. So I'm sorry that that's all I was able to do, because it deserves more. But today's question is this. Why does God care who I sleep with? And so I'm just going to do a quick 15-second pause here, because some of you might have children in here, and if you've got your kids with you in here today, we run an incredible program called Little Switches, Switch Kids and Iggy, and they'll have a great time in there. And if they sit in here today, they might ask more questions on the way home that you don't want to answer, and they're going to ask you, not me. And if you write and put them in the box, I'll be like, you should have taken them to Switch Kids. So we'll call it even. Okay, so there's just a little, we're not being explicit or anything weird like that, but I'm giving you the opportunity if they're here. So the question is, why does God care who I sleep with? And that's a question that's really big in the next generation, right? It's really big in most generations, and it's a question that a lot of people have wrestled with and thought through. And so we just wanted to tackle it because it is so predominant in our culture. And the way I'm going to do this today is Jesus actually talked about this. And there's 3 times in the book of Matthew where Jesus sort of talks about it. 3 that I'm going to draw on. I'm going to take you through 3 passages where Jesus talks about it. And this is like really smart on my behalf, because one, I just want to present what Jesus said, because, well, he's Jesus. And so if you don't like what I say, then not on me, right? Like, we're good. And I think Jesus obviously handles things incredibly well, and he does this too. And so I'm just going to move through Matthew, take you through these 3 passages and share a couple of thoughts at the end. Why does God care who I sleep with? We're going to go to Matthew 5. Jesus is teaching. He's in this little passage where he's teaching about Old Testament laws and what they really mean. And he gets to adultery. And he says, you have heard it said, you should not commit adultery. And so let me explain what adultery means. This is what I got told last night. I go, Clint, you need to tell everyone what adultery is, because no one knows what adultery is anymore. Adultery is simply engaging sexually with someone outside of marriage. Okay? If you're married, it's having an affair. If you're not married, it's having sexual intercourse. If it's whatever, you guys get the picture, right? Outside of marriage, that's it. That's what adultery is. And so Jesus says, you have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. I wonder if people who are listening to this thinking, I wonder where Jesus is going to go with this. Is he going to ease things back? Is he going to change things? Well, I imagine most of Jesus' listeners there were Jewish men, and I imagine most of them, when he gets to this part, he do not commit adultery, they're probably sitting there going, sweet, I can put a tick in that box. I've been faithful to my spouse. I haven't gone down that path. This is one that I can put a tick on, probably, puff their chest out a bit, lifted their shoulders a little bit. And they're going, well, I wonder if Jesus is going to loosen this, because, well, the culture he lives in, because of where we're at today, maybe Jesus is going to be a little bit more tolerant about what we do and what's right. Is he going to loosen the restrictions here? But what Jesus does is he doesn't loosen the restrictions, rather he intensifies it. He says this isn't just about physical behavior, but it's stuff that happens with your eyes and with your heart. He says adultery doesn't just happen in the bedroom, it happens in here. He says, for you have heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Jesus is saying adultery isn't something that just happens out there. It isn't something that just happens in the bedroom. It's not just physical. Adultery happens in here. And in this statement, Jesus does something very, very profound and very, very special, something that we need to learn from, and something that has got Christians into a huge amount of trouble because they haven't listened to this. What Jesus doesn't do when he makes this statement is he doesn't point fingers at he doesn't point fingers at a certain demographic of people. What Jesus does is he puts a mirror up in front of all of us. Because by making this statement that adultery happens in here, he's addressing our hearts, and the reality is that most of us, I'd say all of us, but you might be the exception, but I wouldn't think so, but you might be, maybe. But the reality is all of us have committed adultery in here. That sin's not something sitting simply out there, but it's something that happens in here. And I love the fact that Jesus lifts this so high that I think no one is above it. No one is beyond it. No one can be like, okay, I'm excluded from this. I'm on the right side of this. I think what Jesus says, he goes, this isn't about this group and this and that and that sin and that sin or this and that. He says, hang on a minute, I'm just going to put all of humanity into one big pot here because everyone has committed adultery in their heart. If we move forward to Matthew 15, where we see this emphasized even further, Jesus here says, for out of the heart come evil thoughts. And then he lists some of these things: murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. He says, out of the heart come these evil thoughts, that these start from in here. And again, so we've got a definition of adultery here. Well, what's the definition of sexual immorality? Sexual immorality really is any type of sexual activity that takes place outside of marriage. If it's not within marriage, if it's not with the husband and a wife, it's outside of that. It is, according to Jesus' definition, sexual immorality. If you're on your own, if you're with a screen, if you're having an affair outside of marriage, all this stuff fits within the definition here of sexual immorality. Jesus says, for out of the heart come these things. And what this leads us to is a place, I think, where we can critique culture a little bit. Last week we critiqued just a little bit of culture around tolerance, but what if we critique culture again here, just then from a different perspective? One of the things that culture tells us to do today is, if you want to discover yourself, you need to look within yourself. If you want to know who you really, really are, look deep within yourself. What are your desires? What are your emotions leading you to? What are your feelings? If you look within yourself long enough, you will find your authentic self, and that is who you are meant to be. That's what culture tells us, right? If it feels good, then that must be what you should do. If it feels good, if you desire it, you should go after it. But what Jesus teaches is very different. Jesus would say, no. Looking within yourself will not provide the solution to your angst, that frustration that you've got about why things aren't the way you are. Looking to those desires, looking to those feelings, it won't provide the solution. But what it will lead us to is to see the cause of our angst, because our angst is in here, not out there. It's in Jeremiah, where Jeremiah says the heart is deceitful above all else. As follower of Jesus, we're called to submit our desires to his purposes. We're called to submit the things that we want to what he wants. We've got to lay aside what it is we might desire in order to do what he is calling us to do. If we look within ourselves and we chase after our desires and say, that's my authentic self, the reality is, and a lot of us know this, right, because we've gone down this path. Maybe we've gone down a little way, maybe we've gone down it a long way. But we know trying to fulfill those desires never actually finds fulfillment. It just creates more desire, and that appetite grows and grows and grows, because sin's not something that happens out there. Sin's something that happens in here. And what's interesting about the culture that Jesus was speaking this into was a Jewish culture where people have put up all these rules and all these guardrails to keep them pure, to keep them clean, because they put all these things up to say, we're not going to go to that place. We're not going to engage in that activity. We're not going to do that thing. We're not going to be around those people, because if we do that or go there or hang out with, that's going to make us unclean. But Jesus is saying, no. The uncleanliness doesn't come because of where you go or who you're with or what you're doing. The uncleanliness actually starts from in here. And then if we shift forward again a little bit to Matthew 19, we see Jesus continue to teach in this theme. He says some Pharisees came to Jesus to test him. They didn't come to Jesus to try and get some wisdom from him. They didn't come to Jesus thinking, okay, this is someone we can learn from. This is someone who knows a lot. Let's see what he has to say so we can take it on board and obey it and change what we're doing. No, they came to ask him a question to test him. And this was the question they asked him. They said, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? And this was a really good question for them to come to Jesus with to test him. Because in the culture and in which they were, it was a culture where men had the power. Men had the ability to earn money because they got educated, and females by and large didn't. Men were physically stronger and more imposing, so that they could use and abuse things. That if there was a divorce, generally what would take place is the man would cast the woman aside. No one would want to marry her because she's previously been married. The man would be able to go on with life and continue to provide for himself and continue the life that he was accustomed to, whereas the female would really, really struggle. There was an abuse of power going on here. And there was a couple of different rabbinical thoughts here, but one chain of thought from one rabbinical section was this, that, hey, a husband could divorce his wife for any reason. I don't like the way you do your hair. That's good enough. I don't like the way that you talk to me. I don't like the tone in your voice. I don't like the clothes that you're wearing. Well, whatever it could be, that's grounds. We can get divorced. I want to go this way, leaving the woman very, very vulnerable. Another section of rabbinical thought, the other big one, kind of said, no. You've got to treat your wife better than that. You can't just move on. You can't just divorce her. You can't just end the relationship without good, valid reasoning. And the reason that they brought this question to Jesus to test him was, no matter what Jesus answered, they thought they'd be able to point up fingers at him. If Jesus was too strict with what he said, they would say, come on, Jesus, look what's going on around us. You've got to be more tolerant. You've got to understand where things are at today. You've got to really understand where humans are at, what's going on in this dynamic, and you're being way too strict. But then if Jesus went too easy and said, oh, well, no, the divorce is easy, they'll be able to say, well, Jesus, are you just disregarding what Moses has taught us? Are you disregarding the laws that we've been given? So that they kind of tested him. They threw him this question because they wanted to poke holes in what Jesus said. That they wanted to trap him. They wanted to catch him. And then I love Jesus' response, because Jesus is just incredible. He comes back and he says, these are Pharisees, right? These are people that are very educated, very learned. They knew the Old Testament. They studied the Old Testament. And it's what like a predominant part of their week was spent studying and going through the Old Testament scriptures. And so they asked Jesus this question, and Jesus' response back is, haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female? Jesus says, come on, you learned people, you guys that have been studying so much. Haven't you read? Well, you guys study this book. Let's go just back to the first sentence. Haven't you read that at the beginning God created? He just takes them right back. It's just absolutely brilliant. He's saying, you guys are meant to be learners. You're meant to know all this stuff. Do you even understand the very first words that are written in this text that you supposedly hold up so highly? Haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and these two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate. And so Jesus holds marriage in this high esteem. But what he does here, first he says, You're asking me about divorce. You want to understand divorce? What I want to do is I want to talk to you about marriage. Because if you don't understand marriage, you can't understand divorce. And he says, but if you really want to understand marriage, you actually have to go right back to what God created. Because if you can't understand the way that God created things, you're not going to understand marriage. And so if you can understand how God created things, you'll then be able to understand marriage, and you'll then be able to understand divorce. What Jesus is doing here is he's giving credit to, and he's reinforcing what was taught right back in the start of Genesis. And he's saying, if you want to understand divorce, that's cool, but let's make sure you really understand marriage, and let's make sure you understand what marriage was meant to be and how God created it. And this was controversial. You see, what Jesus taught about marriage has always been and will always be controversial. No matter, a lot of people think now that when it comes to marriage, when it comes to sexuality, the Christian teachings around this is very controversial. I suggest that no matter what culture you're in, no matter what point in history you're in, what Jesus teaches about marriage will be controversial. I promise you. And that makes sense. Because if God sits above time and God sits above culture, what he teaches is going to be controversial no matter which cultural setting you find yourself in. And what we see next shows us why this was so controversial to the crowd that Jesus was with. Why then, the Pharisees asked, did Moses command that a man can give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? They're saying, Jesus, you've made this bar really high. Why then did Moses allow us to do this? And Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard, but it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another woman, commits adultery. And then in the next verse, we see why this was so controversial. You might read that and be like, okay, I get it. I understand what's going on there. It might have been hard to hear. It might have been difficult. But the reality was that I don't see it as being controversial. When you look at the response of the disciples, you see why what Jesus just taught was so controversial. It's hard to fathom, actually, how controversial this was until you really look at this next sentence. And it's a sentence that oftentimes when we read, we can just totally ignore. The disciples then said to Jesus, after hearing this teaching, they said, if this is the situation between a husband and wife, it is better not to marry. So the disciples are there, and Jesus is teaching this, right? And he's saying, man, if you're going to get divorced, you shouldn't divorce. This is what it's all about. And the disciples are sitting there going, Jesus, if you want us to live like that, if you want us to hold marriage that highly, if you want us to love our wives in that sort of a way, it's easy not to get married. Let's just overlook marriage. Let's just never go there. That standard is just too high. That shows how controversial what Jesus taught was. You see, at that time, because what was culturally normal, what was considered right in society at the time was that the man with the power could use and abuse and leave the powerless in a very vulnerable situation. That was what culture said was right. So when Jesus says, no, you cannot treat your wife like that. That is not what God intended. It was controversial to the point that the disciples who had been around Jesus a long time go, well, that's what he wants us to do. Let's just give up on this marriage idea. It's just too hard to love someone like that. Let me suggest that what Jesus taught about marriage has always been and always will be controversial. But why it's controversial is going to be different at different times and in different cultures. In some cultures, what's controversial about this is that it's between one man and one woman. It says, our man and our woman will come together. And some cultures say, no. Marriage should be between him and her and her and her and her and her. The controversial part is the fact that it's between one. In our cultural context, what brings the most controversy is the fact that Jesus says that it's between a man and a woman. This is controversial, but it always will be controversial. Anytime, any place, any culture, any point in history. What Jesus is teaching is controversial. It's challenging. But it's what he calls us to. See, this is what's hard about this, right? Is Jesus taught this. We can try and adjust it. We can try and fit it to go with our current cultural narrative and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is Jesus has written this. So we can either pay attention to it or we can ignore it. I think what we need to do is pay attention to it and understand that, yes, it's controversial. Yes, it can cause some angst inside of us. But this has always caused that in people. Just for different reasons, at different times, in different places. So why does God care who I sleep with? I'll just give you two quick thoughts on this, right? The first one's this. God created sexuality. God designed sexuality to be a deep form of human intimacy. Not just physical, but emotional, relational, and spiritual. Sex is the one act that can literally create life. And God put that power in human hands. That's not a casual thing. That's a sacred thing. One of the things our culture would say about sex is, oh, casual sex is good. If it feels good, do it. But when we understand that God created it, we understand the power and the potential of it, we realize, hang on a minute, this thing isn't simply casual. This is sacred. That marriage is a metaphor. Throughout the scripture, marriage is used as a metaphor for the way that God loves his people. That it's a metaphor that starts right back in Genesis, runs all the way through. Jesus refers to himself, right, and is labeled as the bridegroom. In Revelation, it talks about the bridegroom coming back for his bride. That it's a metaphor that shows God's love, faithfulness, kindness, and goodness to his people. God created sexuality, so of course he's going to care about it. Another thought here is this. Why would a good God who wants you to flourish not care? If God really is good, if God really wants you to live life and life to the full, why would he not care about sexuality? He knows the power that it has. He knows the potential it has to do good and to cause harm. If he really is a good God, of course he's going to care about it. If there's things that are going to harm you, if there's things that are going to hurt you, if there's something that's going to hinder you, I think he'd care deeply about it. See, God could have made reproduction purely biological, but he didn't. When he created it, he made it pleasurable, intimate, binding. God knows the power of sex because he created it, so he put some guardrails around it, not to restrict us, but rather to protect us. You see, when we dive into this, and we were scratching the surface, and I was meant to say this at the start, and I forgot. Here's one. We're scratching the surface. If you've got a lot of questions around this, we offer an incredible group here called Christian Sexuality. We've run it multiple times. It's available for teens, and it's available for adults, and it's one of the groups that often runs in our group semesters. It's not on this semester, but it was on last semester. It comes up fairly regularly. I ran it a couple of times, and we've got an incredible lady in our church, Natalie, that's run it the last few times, and the content's brilliant. What it does is it goes through the stuff over 12 weeks. So if you've got questions, it really creates a place for those questions to be turned into conversation. And I just encourage you, if you're thinking through and wrestling with some of the stuff, can I encourage you? You need to. You should go along to the Christian sexuality course. It honestly is fantastic. And one of the reasons we chose this particular one is it's actually a course that's designed for teenagers. And the reason we wanted to, or the reason I really pushed for this and we adopted this was because we wanted to create a space where if parents did the course and thought, man, that'd be really, really good for my teenager to go and listen to, then, man, I can send them along. I can encourage them to go and be part of it, and maybe we can have a conversation at home afterwards. And I just think that for all of us, because sex is so predominant in our culture, this is a group that I think we all should do because it's really, really good. So if you're sitting here and there's a lot of unanswered questions, that is, I think, one of the best resources we've got that will help with that. And it can be seen to be hard teaching, but it isn't harsh teaching. It's the teaching of a loving God who loves us too much to leave us confused about something so prominent in the human experience. The Christian sexual ethic isn't just about avoiding certain behaviors. It's about embracing a vision of human flourishing. It isn't about control, it's about protection and purpose. God's design comes from a place of love, not legalism. Why God cares who we sleep with? Because God wants you to flourish in life. And He knows the impact this has. See, the truth is, we're all sitting here and we come from very different places. We have very different stories. But I would bet there's not one person in this room that hasn't had to deal with pain, suffering, hurts, regrets, because someone, maybe them, maybe someone else, engaged in sexual activity outside of what God said how it should be done. There's people in this room that don't speak to their mum, that don't speak to their dad because of infidelity, because of adultery that they committed, and their relationship got broken, and there's now a brokenness in the next generation because their relationship got so severed because someone couldn't control their sexual appetite. There's people in this room that have lost sleep for many nights as they've dealt with the pain that's been inflicted on them by a partner who's cheated. There's people that have lost their relationship with an auntie they once admired, with an uncle they were close to, because that relationship went funny because of infidelity. There's people in this room that have been incredibly broken, not because they did something wrong, but because someone else's sexual appetite was so out of control. They did something to you that no one should do to someone else. Some of us have got habits and practices that we've picked up because we've never dealt with and never learned to deal with the sexual desires and urges that we've got. And so we're doing things we know we shouldn't be doing, and we're too ashamed to talk to someone about it because of the lie from the devil that says to us, hey, you can't talk about this because it's too embarrassing. It says you're the only one. The truth is, this is huge. And when God gives us away, He does it to protect us because He loves us. Out the back of our house, we've got this incredible machine. I don't know how to describe it. It's about this big. You put 42, honestly, it's about 42 massive logs of wood go into it. And you start a fire in it. And then when we actually light it, which is all the time at the moment, and we keep restocking it, and it heats these massive cylinders of water up. And this water travels through our house and keeps our entire house warm. But it doesn't just warm our house, it warms the house next to us, it warms the office, it warms another property, it warms another room. Because this machine that's there, you light a fire in it, and that fire heats the water, and that water provides warmth and protection for all of us. Our family can enjoy the house through these cool winter months, predominantly because that machine's working. That fire is incredibly powerful It is incredibly helpful and it is incredibly beneficial to us. But if that fire came out of that unit, if someone left the door open and walked away and that fire came out of that unit, that same fire that makes the house warm, that makes the house pleasant, that provides for us, that takes care for us, has the potential to kill us or to do a huge amount of damage to all that we've got. But because it's contained, because it's within boundaries, we can harness the good of it without experiencing the hurt of it. When it comes to sexuality, that's exactly what God's boundaries do for us. They enable us to get the protection. They enable us to get the good from it, while preventing us from all the hurt, the heartbreak, the regret, the guilt, the shame, the difficulties that it can also bring. So why does God care who I sleep with? He cares who you sleep with because he cares about you. I'm just going to invite the band up because we're going to finish this. The band's going to perform a song for us. It's called Good Plans. And this is quite a heavy subject because I know for a lot of us there's a lot of emotion around this because that shows how central this is to our lives. That for a lot of us, our biggest regrets are tied to this. Our deepest hurts are tied to this. But what we want you to know is there is a good God who has a good plan for you. We can't change what's happened in the past, but we do have a choice as to what happens as we move forward. We can submit our desires, our feelings, what we want to him. And when we submit to him, we position him to work out those good plans he has for us. But it requires us to submit. And I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying this isn't controversial. But Jesus calls us to it. I once heard a saying, and it went like this. To those who can't hear the music, the dancing looks crazy. To those who can't hear the music, the dancing looks ridiculous. But when you hear the music, all of a sudden the dancing becomes beautiful, meaningful. To those who don't know Jesus, this sexual ethic can seem ludicrous, crazy, ridiculous. But when you hear the music, when you know how loved you are, when you know how for you God is, when you know God's desire is a good plan for you to flourish and thrive in life, you're willing to dance. Because you know he's not saying this from a place of legalism. You know he's not calling you to this to be a killjoy or to rob you or something. You know he's calling you to this because he is so for you.